Yes.
Yes.
Good morning. This is Friday, July 7th, 10 a.m. We are meeting Central Nevada Regional Water Authority in the Churchill County Administrative Building in their commission chambers. It's not on the agenda. Oh, yeah, it is on the agenda. Will you please
Recording
rise
in
and
progress.
will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Norm, do the honor.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Jeff, will you do roll, please? Here. While Jeff's getting ready to do that, I just want to thank Churchill County once again for hosting this meeting. I think it's a terrific midway point for everyone, and we appreciate the opportunity to use this room and greatly appreciate their hospitality.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Here.
Here. Mr. Frey.
Present.
Commissioner Steninger. Commissioner Bruff.
Here.
Commissioner Keys.
I'm here.
Ms. Bolin.
Here.
Mr. Wagonseller. I saw him on there.
Yeah.
Here.
There we go. Okay, Commissioner Plaskett.
I'm here.
Mr. Etchegrary. Mr. Gallagher.
He's not here, Jeff.
Okay. Commissioner Haas.
Here.
Commissioner Waits. Commissioner Thomas. Mr. Lonnie. Commissioner Strickland.
She's on the phone.
Chair Easley.
Yep.
Ms. Carver.
Yes.
Commissioner Hudson. Mr. Mancebo. Mr. Evans. Commissioner Carson.
On the phone, yes, good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Perea.
Here.
And Mr. Odgers.
Here.
Okay, alternates, Mr. Barbie. Mr. Tibbetts.
Here.
Commissioner Hill. Commissioner Vogler.
Here.
Okay, Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
All right.
Pardon me, Strickland's here also.
We got you, Deb. We saw you on the, your name on the Zoom, so we've got you.
Thank you.
If we could start over here and have the guests introduce themselves.
Commissioner Miles Ghetto from Churchill County.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, guest. Gotcha.
Lauren Bartels with the Division of Water Resources.
thank you.
Kip Allender, Division of Water Resources.
Yeah, it's a new microphone
Just push
system.
the
Yeah,
blinking button.
that works too.
Knock it over. Ed James with the Carson Water Subconservancy District.
I'm Doug Busselman with Nevada Farm Bureau.
Pete Goycochea, Senate District 19.
Right, and in the back here, sir? behind Patsy,
That's
the
Mike
gentleman
Neff.
behind you.
Mike Neff.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you. Let's move to item 2 on our. Sorry, my mic went off. Item number 2 is public comment. This time is devoted to comments by the general public. We do not take action on any matters that are brought up under public comment. We will not take action on them until they are included on an agenda as a regular action item. Is there any general public comment? Any public comment on the phone? Hearing none.
No.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Madam Chair, for the record, if I might be included, this is Sam Routson for Crawford Farms and Cattle.
Could you spell your last name for us, please? Oh, do you have it, Jeff?
R.
Okay, that's okay. We have it. We have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other general public comment on the phone? Sam, were you just did you want to make general public comment, or were you just letting us know that you were on the line?
Just that I'm on the line for the
Okay.
record, but it is a beautiful day here.
It is here too, and we're happy to have you join us. Thank you. General public comment is closed. Item number 3 is approval of today's agenda. Jeff, is there any item we want to remove?
I don't know that we have anybody here to address item number 6. Yeah, I don't think there's anybody here to.
Yeah, I don't either. We're going to remove item number 6. Yeah, and we'll move that to our next regularly scheduled meeting. Anything else? No? Great. Not necessary, but, yeah. Yeah, so here, we're just gonna remove item number 6, and the agenda will stand with that removal. Item 4 is approval of minutes from the March 31st, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion? Roger, now's your chance.
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Mancebo, second by Commissioner Frey. Any questions concerning the motion? Hearing none, is there any opposition to that motion to approve the minutes? Hearing none, that motion passes. Item 5, financial report and quarterly expenditures. Jeff, is there anything you need to add?
Quickly, there's two items in here. One is a budget report for the end of May, and so we have another month of expenditures, including the invoice that is also attached here under tab 2A for Nevada Authority Management Services, but I would anticipate about another $17,000 in expenditures for the month of June, and then bring our total expenditures at about $62,000 for the year, which is under budget. And I think that's really the only thing I wanted to mention about as far as the budget and the invoices. So, unless there's any questions.
Yeah, Norm.
Are we making any progress in finding somebody for the executive assistant? That would be taking Alex's spot?
Yes.
We are making progress.
I have reached out to someone who has indicated an interest, and so it's possible I may be bringing an item to the board after Jeff has an opportunity to visit with them.
Okay. And then the government affairs contract, that is Nina?
That's correct. And that's closed out for this.
And then are there still plans in progress for a workshop or conference?
We haven't really discussed it.
No, we haven't.
Okay. Just keeping the thought in everybody's mind.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Motion by,
Second.
motion by Commissioner
Lori
Frey.
Carson.
Sorry, Lori.
Second by,
Yeah, Lori, there's a motion by Commissioner Frey, a second by Commissioner Mancebo. Any questions?
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear
That's,
him.
no, that's okay.
Thank you.
That's all right. Yeah, we're working with a new microphone system here, and if you don't speak, it kind of times out. So we just have to remember to keep it turned on. So there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any questions concerning the motion? Hearing none, is there any opposition to the motion? With no opposition, that motion passes. We've removed item number 6. We will move to item number 7. This is an update from the Legislative Committee and possible action regarding bills and other measures in the 2023 legislative session. Who wants to lead this off? The chair of the committee, Commissioner Frey, or Jeff, do you, somebody jump in?
I would love to start.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank Jeff and Nina.
Can everybody hear him on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Like to thank.
Hearing everybody really well here. Thanks.
Oh, terrific.
Good. We have an IT guy with us today from Churchill County that is breaking in our new system. We've got all new microphones in the room, a lot more microphones, new buttons to push, and
They're a lot more
he needs
sensitive.
that input if you have a problem hearing. We've eliminated the one microphone in the middle of the room for those of you that have been here to see us, and so it's a lot more convenient, and hopefully the sound that you get through is better as well. But I would like to start as Legislative Committee Chair to thank Jeff and Nina, all of the active participants that we met every week to every 2 weeks when necessary, and had great participation. And Jeff and Nina really rely on that participation in those discussions. So I'd like to thank everybody very much, our partners in crime at the legislature, and since Pete's here today, I want to thank him especially for carrying a lot of water for us during this session.
No pun intended.
Yeah, we had 17 bills that we tracked regularly. I think there were actually more than that, but at the end of the session, we were tracking 17 bills. 10 of them were approved by the governor. Some surprises that failed in getting Senator Watt's AB 387 through. Just surprised me, the opposition to best available science, hydrological connections, and groundwater bases. That just blew me away. Very frustrating when you're trying to promote something, and some of the ridiculous bills fail, like having a waitress ask you if you want a glass of water before you get a glass of water at a restaurant. That's good use of our legislative time, folks. The volunteer retirement of water rights program that Pete sponsored just amazes me that couldn't get support. So we have alternatives that we're going to look into today, so stay tuned. But after that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who handled the day-to-day, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of dialogue with Pete. And if Nina comes on, love to have her participate as well.
We're not hearing anything.
They're working on it.
We're having technical difficulties.
Oh, thank you for the update.
Here we go.
Okay. Microphone. Well, thanks, Norm. And I just want to thank Mr. Frey and the members of the Legislative Committee. It was really just very useful and important for us to get together every couple of weeks and really just talk about these bills, pros and cons, hear about some of the things that perhaps I hadn't thought about or others didn't consider in some of these measures. And so for a lot of folks, including Norm, for example, who, who relies on water for his livelihood, and others that represent different interests in this organization, it was just great to hear about how some of these bills would impact the public. So, and then the other comment I want to make is with regard to Senator Goicoechea and this being his last session. I can't even begin to say how much I appreciate on behalf of Central Nevada Regional Water Authority. I remember when I first got appointed to this position 5.5 years ago, after having spent 10 years with the Nevada Association of Counties. And my very first meeting was in Winnemucca. This board met, and that was my very first meeting with this group. And Senator Goicoechea made it a point to come to that meeting just to be there, offer his support for CNRWA. And so, over the last several sessions, we worked very, very closely with him. And I can tell you that there's no doubt he is regarded as the most knowledgeable legislator in the state of Nevada with regard to water, not to mention the work that he does for all of rural Nevada and all of Nevada, really. So I'm glad he has a microphone in front of him, because I'll go through the bills, but certainly would invite Senator Goicoechea to comment on any of these issues and provide whatever oversight or information or overview and information he'd like to provide as well. So with that, let me just run down the list of bills that you have in your tracking sheet. And there are several we're just going to skip over pretty quickly because they're pretty, they're water related bills, but not specifically related to things that this organization does or would have a significant impact in rural Nevada. But there are obviously half a dozen bills or so that we want to focus on, and including bills that did not make it out of the legislature, which we want to talk about further. So with that, I guess before I get started, are there any questions about just the session that I can answer, or that you have about just sort of the session in general, or any of that before we get into the details of some of the bills?
Yeah, I want to make a comment. Some of our conversations at our legislative committee meetings, some of the ways that the majority party did the rules created problems for testifying on a minor issue. You had to disapprove the bill. Jeff can go into that a little bit more because they had to live it every day. But the rules were kind of a little bit wonky and created problems. You might have seen some opposition from us or from Farm Bureau, who's a very valued partner at the legislature. You may have seen some bills and you wonder, why in the heck are they going against this? But it's just the way the rules worked.
Right, so thanks for that comment. Every committee chair, I guess, and Senator Goicoechea can affirm this or not, but pretty much has some leeway on how they run their committees, and generally they try to be consistent. For example, 2 minutes of public comment this session, which we can debate whether or not that was a good idea. Just a lot of different things, but some committee members have sort of rules that are unique to their committee, and one important committee that we work with really routinely is the Assembly Natural Resources Committee, and Chair Cohen there had a rule that she enforced I think, pretty well and consistently, that if you support a bill, you support a bill. No ifs, ands, or buts, no caveats. If you like a bill 90%, but you have something in that bill that you don't like, you can't support the bill. You've got to oppose the bill. And if you're neutral, and you just add information. So that was unique, and I think what Mr. Frey was talking about was the hearing on AB 387. I think there was one witness that testified in support and about 24 that opposed the bill, and some of those that opposed the bill really didn't oppose the bill. I mean, they did according to the rules, but they liked the bill a lot more than they didn't like it. So,
But if you don't look specifically at what the public comment was, and you're just looking at support or opposition in totality, couldn't the argument be made that there were 50 people against the bill and 2 people for it? You know what I'm trying to say.
right,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll say this. I can think about a couple of hearings on bills that were pretty intense hearings. Lots of passionate testimony on both sides of the issue. The legislators, I assure you, legislators paid attention. They listened to the testimony. They didn't really care. I mean, I shouldn't say they didn't care, but it didn't matter as much about what position you landed on. It was really about the testimony. And so a lot of us, for example, went up and testified on bills that we were technically opposed to according to the rules, but said, you know, if we could fix this or fix that, we might be willing to come around and support the bill. So that's kind of just, you know, like I said, unique to that particular committee. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, let me just start with.
Just one, and I'm assuming that you're going to cover this, but I want to make sure that we cover it. We know that SB 176 failed to be enacted, but there is something that will be administered out of the governor's office.
So we'll talk about SB 176, and then we'll on another agenda item
Okay.
be talking about
What the alternative
what an
may be.
alternative may be
Yeah.
to that.
Okay,
Correct.
Thanks.
Okay. So AB 19 and 20 were Division of Environmental Protection.
And Division of Water.
Yeah, bills that were more sort of administrative cleanup bills. We tracked them, but didn't take a position one way or the other. And again, I don't think there was any opposition, and those bills were passed out by the legislature and signed by the governor. Those were pre-filed bills, which means they were bills that were requested by in September by the executive branch. AB 34 was also a pre-filed bill, and that bill was approved by the governor, and that bill is something that we talked about quite a bit, and it has to do with the public notice requirement. When considering certain actions, including water right applications. The initial bill was very complex and not sure really addressed the problem, and the problem being that the state engineer sometimes, and I'm not sure how frequent this occurs, but you know, we're told that it's caused some problems in the past, and that is the requirement for a notice to be published in a newspaper of general circulation in the county where the water application is for or in, and it requires publishing in that paper for 4 consecutive weeks. And there have been occasions apparently where newspapers would get the notice, they'd publish it for a week, maybe 2 weeks, skip the 3rd week for whatever reason, and then resume it. And technically that's not in compliance with state law. And so they have to go back to square one, delays the application, delays the whole process. And so I think we all recognize what's taking place with, you know, printed newspapers around the country, especially in the rural areas. So this bill tries to address that problem by basically eliminating the requirement for those 4 weeks to be consecutive. That's probably the best outcome on this bill because, quite frankly, the earlier versions of it were not acceptable. But one of the things that we really were very vocal about, and I believe that the Division of Water Resources heard this and is going to do their due diligence, is they really need to be improving their website and all of these publications so that, you know, that's where a lot of people now are getting their information. And, you know, for me, I go through the monthly reports, but not everybody does. And so that process needs to be made improved and be clearer. And so that's where we ended up. I think it's a good place to be. It sort of balances the need for making sure that there's 4 weeks of public notices on applications, but sort of loosens up the restrictions so that there is some flexibility if a newspaper doesn't do it 4 consecutive weeks. And by the way, for folks who worked on these bills, Doug, Jake, others, Chris, feel free to chime in if there's any other comments or anything I missed. AB 91 was a bill from Assemblyman DeLong. Assemblyman DeLong represents a southern Washoe County, sort of a suburban area to the city of Reno. Also has an environmental and geology background. He brought a couple of bills. This one would exempt a private entity with a water right of, well, start out to be small municipal and domestic water systems to have to prepare a water conservation plan. And this went through several iterations as well. And basically, I think what it ended up with is, let me pull it out here. It's in here. Here we go. Okay, so now what it says is that if your water system, so if it's a public or private water system, but it has less than 15 service connections, then you don't have to prepare a water conservation plan. And this is really intended to relieve the burden and recognize the realities of small water systems. Maybe it serves a small school or serves, you know, convenience store or something like that. The responsibility of having to do a water conservation plan, I think those entities know where their leaks are, know what the issues are, and have every interest in conserving water as anybody else. And so that bill was a good bill, and it was passed and signed by the governor. Let's see, AB 191. Excuse me. That was 191. That was AB 91. AB 91 allows a new replacement well to be sited on public land if it's adjacent to the land where your well is, as long as it's within 300 feet. You can do that without submitting an application to the Division of Water Resources. That doesn't eliminate your requirement to file with the BLM or anybody else, but it just gives sort of more flexibility for an existing law that allows a well to be moved within 300 feet of an existing well. And I think that was Senator Goycochea's had an amendment on that a couple sessions ago to allow it to be on adjacent parcels as long as the parcels are owned by the same entity.
Yes, that's correct.
It lit green for a minute. Okay, thank you. Yes, we brought that legislation that allows you to cross a section line as long as you're in that required 600 feet. You can actually go in an adjacent parcel. And then also we had, it's probably been 3 or 4 sessions ago, that you can do an emergency well on your own property. This is a good enough piece of legislation. The problem is clearly for Division of Water Resources, they don't have to go to you to get permission, but ultimately for you to give them an emergency, even under an emergency scenario on your own property, we still have to go to Division of Water Resources. You would still have to go to Division of Water Resources, and I'm sure they're going to say, well, wait a minute, make sure the forester, the BLM is signing off on this. And that's where it gets problematic. But it was a good enough bill.
Thanks, Senator. AB 220 is the Southern Nevada Water Conservation Bill, this was probably one of the more complex water bills this session. I think it had a total of 3 or more amendments. Didn't get passed out until I think the end of May, one of the last weeks of the session. There's a lot in this bill. 90% or more of it, 95% of it really relates specifically to Southern Nevada, and even more specifically to water that comes from the Colorado River. That's what it's about, is conservation. And quite frankly, Southern Nevada Water Authority is really trying to get ahead of this issue and conserve as much water as they possibly can. And the issue being that every acre foot of water they get from the Colorado River, as long as it's returned to the Colorado River through reuse, it's not a debit against Southern Nevada Water Authority's allocation of water from the Colorado River. So it's a great opportunity to be able to do more return flow credits. There are issues, for example, related to septic tanks in Southern Nevada, where that water that goes to your septic tank never finds its way back into the Colorado River, at least not through a municipal sewer system. So there is no credit, return flow credit, for those septic systems. So that's really, I think, the heart of this bill, this legislation. There are some implications to rural Nevada in terms of connections, distances, and requirements. If your well is within so many, I think a quarter of a mile from municipal sewer system, that now applies statewide. And trying to think, there's no other requirements for any concurrent reviews in the rural counties. That was amended so it applies only to Clark County, I believe. Population cap. So I think really 99% of this bill, or 98%, whatever, applies exclusively to Southern Nevada. There are a couple of provisions, like I said, that would apply statewide. Of course, there's a lot of funding related to this, and so it's an important initiative for Southern Nevada. Let's see. AB 261 is an economic development bill, and this simply requires the Governor's Office of Economic Development and the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance Regional Development Authority to consider water use when dealing with or recruiting new businesses for the state of Nevada, is to make sure that they're really focusing on water users that have good conservation plans and aren't huge consumptive water users. SB 99, that is Senator Goicochea's bill, and that is an appropriation of $1.2 million to the Desert Research Institute for a statewide cloud seeding program. And that's an important program for the river basins, Humboldt River Basin, Carson Basin, right? I believe that in Pahrump there's some cloud seeding, or outside of Pahrump there's some cloud seeding. And interestingly, on the Colorado River there's a lot of cloud seeding in the upper basin. I believe Southern Nevada Water Authority participates in as well. So this is a good program, and thanks to Senator Goycochea, DRI will have $1.2 million to do cloud seeding over the next biennium. And of course, this is my second go-round with a request for cloud seeding funding from the legislature, and it seemed like the last time was when we had a pretty banner snow year, and of course this year it was hard to walk into those committees with a straight face and ask for money for cloud seeding when it was still snowing in April. But thankfully, they saw the wisdom in this and understand that, you know, one good year of snowfall doesn't mean they're going to have another.
Doesn't mean
the drought's over. So, anyway, thanks to Senator Goycochea for this bill. Senate Bill 102 was actually a request from this group through Senator Goycochea again, who sponsored the bill, for a $1 million appropriation for assistance to counties for preparing and updating water resource plans, which of course.
I didn't understand the opposition to that.
Well, the bill never got a hearing. It went straight to finance. And originally, when Senate Bill 150 was heard, and again that was another Senator Goycochea bill that he did by our request. We talked about funding. We thought we could tie it into the state revolving loan fund and the AB 198 grant program. We never did get it to work. We worked with the Division of Environmental Protection, and apparently there were some Treasury rules on how the AB 198 money could be used, but we never did get it straightened out. So this was an attempt to just get an appropriation for that. If there was any opposition, it may have come from folks who didn't believe it was necessary for counties to have
They
to
don't
have.
get it.
Yeah, they don't get it. They don't understand that stuff like this, because it's not a state mandate, is a discretionary budget item for most counties, and for rural counties, there isn't a lot of money for discretionary types of programs. So,
Just a comment, if I may. Senator Goycochea for the record. And again, I think the key piece to that, I never saw a session that was quite so partisan, and I had quite a few bills that were floating to the top, and I have to be honest, a lot of them were in finance, and at some point the chair there just decided some of them weren't going to move, and that's the long and the short of it. It was a very partisan session, my 11th session, and it was the worst I've seen as far as partisanship, but and we're getting to be a little closer minority, and I don't mind saying that on the record. It's got a little harder to do business, there's no doubt.
thank you, Senator. It's not something I could have said, but.
But we all think it.
Okay, and also with regard to Senate Bill 102, again, we're looking at pursuing some additional potential opportunities here for funding those plans. Senate Bill 112. This was another bill that we requested and Senator Goycochea sponsored. We thought we had a really good bill. And so did a lot of other people, and apparently no one thought it was a bad idea, perhaps except for the Division of Water Resources, although I guess another rule that I should have, or I guess protocol that I should have mentioned early on is executive branch agencies, it doesn't matter who you are, unless you've been given very explicit approval or instructions by the governor, you never testify on a bill except in the neutral position. That's not just this governor, that's just how it is. In this particular bill, this is a complete revamp of a bill that we requested and Senator Goycochea sponsored back in the 2001 session that got a hearing, and everything was remote back then, of course, during the pandemic, but there were some issues that we worked out with the opposition, but I know that the state engineer had some concerns, and we understood that, so we went back and revamped this bill, And quite frankly, the way the bill was, this particular bill was drafted was, I thought, pretty straightforward, really had very minimal fiscal impact to the Division of Water Resources, but thought it was a pretty good compromise between, trying to facilitate more robust local participation and, getting too much in terms of micromanaging or advising the state engineer, making recommendations. So anyway, this bill was heard. It passed out of, it was referred, I don't think it passed out of Senate Finance. I guess it was just referred to Senate Finance, but there was no opposition. And the reason it was referred to Senate Finance is because it did have a fiscal note on it. This bill was about dealing with the basin accounts, which, for those of you who know about the basin accounts, it's basically an assessment on that the state engineer can tell the county board of commissioners to impose on certain designated basins. They're not in every designated basin, but there are assessments in maybe 50 of the basins, I think. And in basins that are used primarily for agriculture, those assessments are based on your duty, your acre, the amount of water that you have. Basically, a property tax is what it is. And so that money is supposed to be used for work in that basin, special administration for that basin. Well, in 2021 session, the lead up to that, the governor's budget transferred $1.6 million out of that account into the general fund and supplanted general fund dollars, and those funds were then are now being used, or well, the years past were then being used to support positions that had a questionable role, and that was more sort of overhead costs associated with.
The argument could be made being used for everything except their statutory purpose.
Well, other things and perhaps some of their statutory purpose. But in any event, my personal opinion is it did not meet the intent. Maybe it was legal, maybe a legal, LCB legal could have justified it, but I don't think that's what was intended. So the idea was to prevent that from happening in the future. We actually worked with the Division of Water Resources to get language to make sure that the bill didn't affect other portions of their operations or budget. We came up with the language. In fact, they offered an amendment. The other piece was to put a cap on that assessment, because under existing law, there is no cap on how much the state engineer can tell a county board of commissioners to levy on in those basins. And then the last piece was to sort of compel the state engineer to come to a board of county commissioners to report on how those basin account revenues are being used, even though, they do, I guess they try to get to commission meetings when requested. We can't always rely on that, so we need to put it in law to make sure that they do actually appear.
My one comment, this looks like a prime place that we need to do work between sessions with the governor himself, because the governor can issue directives to his appointees that you get this money out of the general fund and start using it where it's supposed to be used. And we as representatives of counties need to make sure that those questions are asked when the state engineer appears before our county commission meetings, because that would be, let them know we're watching, that these funds should go in the basins that they're collected for use to benefit our communities. And it's universal over all the counties, but you need to understand these, where these basin funds are supposed to go with, what they can be used for, and advocate for it when the state engineer is before you.
Well, fortunately, Mr. Frey, that was addressed. Senator Goycochea worked to get that basin account restored. Worked with the governor's office to get that done.
Yes, again, Senator Goycochea for the record. And I believe Senate Bill 112 actually came through Natural Resources and Senator Pazina and then was referred to Finance because of the fiscal note, then subsequent actions by the joint committees on Finance committees and fiscal. We plugged in, I think, another $3.7 million to the state engineer's account to backfill that and establish on the record that these basin accounts can only be used in that prospective basin. I think it's pretty well established on the record that that is the case. We backfilled it. Unfortunately, again, the chair of finance, for whatever reason, even though she was very aware, and fiscal went to her and said, hey, there is no fiscal note, failed to move the bill. But, and again, why, we'll discuss that. And that bill can come forward the next session. Clearly, I think it's been established on the record. That's the only place. The only thing we're really lacking is the fact that that did cap the maximum charge on a basin account, which I think is critical as well, although it does give you the ability to come back and petition for more money in a basin if you can show the need. So I think, and I'm just first and foremost, I want to say I've never had a session where we had as good a working group. You know, we had huge working groups, 40 and 50 people around a table. But this session, the people that were at the table all had a common goal, and they were, I don't care if it was Nature Conservancy, who the group was, we were able to, and I want to thank Mr. Tippett's on the phone. He's great at wordsmithing, even though sometimes you got to send it back to him several times to to get your words in there. But anyway, like say Jake and Jeff and Doug and all the people, there were the stakeholders in this particular session were great. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it across the finish line as it dealt with the legislature. A lot of that, I'm sorry. The bottom line is most of those stakeholders, other than Southern Nevada Water Authority, and they were also very engaged, just couldn't bring enough Southern legislators with them to move some of these bills. But the next session, there's always next session, and you know, Norm made a comment about a waste of time. When you take 4 snow days, there is no such thing as a waste of time in the legislature. So really, it doesn't matter how minute the bill is. You're always planting a seed in it. In that context, I think there's a lot of groundwork that was brought forward by stakeholders from all over the state. And I think the next session, it'll make it a little easier to bring some of that, as long as we continue to have these guys crafting language. So it was good. But no, 112, I was disappointed. But again, that was clear politics. It had nothing to do with the bill.
Commissioner Strickland, Nye County, are you on the line?
I am, Chair.
Yeah, are you listening to this conversation? This is particularly important, I think, to Nye County because when the approval of those groundwater assessments comes before the Board of County Commissioners, they pretty routinely deny them. So I would think that you would be very interested in this bill and what happened and the need to stay engaged and to insist on proof for how those funds are being used.
Yes, thank you for that. That is exactly the position of this board. We have been denying that and asking for more information and getting it from DWR. They are calling into the meeting and explaining. And so it's working out better. But you're right, we need more accountability before we ever get the bill. And so that I'm looking forward to for this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, Senate Bill 113, that's a bill requested by the Farm Bureau, Nevada Farm Bureau, sponsored by Senator Goycochea, and it deals with the requirements.
It's really
touchy. I
You
see
can
that.
touch
Yeah.
the base.
So it amends requirements for groundwater management plans in critical management areas, and again, specific to critical management areas. To date, there's only been one, that's Diamond Valley. This bill does not affect the decision or outcome or CMA in Diamond Valley, but it does set new requirements going forward. I don't know if anybody wants to hear the details or wants to describe the details, but this was a Farm Bureau bill, and again, it essentially makes clear that in a critical management area, if there's a groundwater management plan developed, it's clear that the plan cannot deviate from the prior appropriation doctrine, I should say contrary, but which is different than what the Supreme Court ruled in the case of Diamond Valley. And then it also sets forth some, going forward, some additional checks, I guess, or requirements in terms of making sure that if a groundwater management plan and a CMA is developed, that it meets certain conditions in order to be approved. So I don't know if Senator Goichi or Doug or Jake want to talk about this one. Okay, it's not. SB 176. This was a really priority bill for a lot of us, and we had, again, thanks to Senator Goichi, a bill that would have established in statute a program for voluntary retirement of water rights, primarily in overpumped and overappropriated basins, and also appropriate $5 million to stand up the program and initially start to acquire some water rights from willing sellers in those basins. The bill was amended thanks to Jake, Laurel Saito with the Nature Conservancy, to have a nexus as well in certain circumstances with environmental concerns, and we think that that's a good approach. It also opens up the door potentially for other funding besides state funding. So, for example, there are NRCS funding programs and conservation dollars that might be available to go on a program like this in addition to general fund dollars. So the bill was amended. When it was heard in Senate Finance, it was just an amazing amount of support, enthusiastic support, and across the board, rural, urban, environmental organizations, ranching, agriculture, this group, of course, and no opposition on the record that I remember to this bill. In fact, I remember the chair of Senate Natural Resources, Chair Pizzina, commenting at the end of the hearing about how impressed she was with the work that was done on the bill and the overall support for it. Because it had a fiscal note, it too went to Senate Finance. And this is where I can kind of step into it a little bit. I can say that even with the willingness to reduce the appropriation request and outright pleas to hear this bill in Senate Finance from a number of folks, both behind the scenes and on the record, the bill was not given a hearing in Senate Finance, so it failed. But we'll talk about the concept of water rights retirement on the next agenda item. So that's that. Senate Bill 1, Senator?
Just one comment on that. I looked at 113 and 176 as truly being companion bills. When you put the language in 113 in place and start the 10-year clock, whether you're a critical management, at the point you received a critical management area designation, then you had 10 years. And it's, at the end of 10, if you don't have the recovery, then you're going to have to curtail by priority. And I saw 176 as a companion vehicle that could enter into this and allow some of those people, through no fault of their own, were a junior permit, and we're going to be curtailed. And it gave them the ability to maybe salvage some part of their operation, or it's not a golden parachute. It was just a softer landing for some of those people that are clearly going to be curtailed in this state. We know it's out there. 60% of our basins are overappropriated. I'll leave it to you guys to determine how many are overpumped, but the bottom line is there's going to be impact as we move forward. And so I looked at 176 and 113 as truly being companion bills. Once you start implementing 113, you're going to have an opportunity for 176. Unfortunately, as Mr. Fontaine said, it was getting very strained by this point of the session, and nothing was moving, and for whatever reason. But again, 176 does have a ton of support statewide, and I think hence that's why, as Mr. Fontaine will get into later in this meeting, we are looking at, and we have had conversations with the governor's office and those places, trying to stand at least a piece of this back up. But hopefully it'll work. But again, it was getting very strained by that point of the session, there's no doubt.
Thank you. Senate Bill 180, another CNRWA request for Senator Goycochea, sponsored the bill. And this is the bill that would have created in statute groundwater management boards for designated basins. This was the bill that was, I mentioned earlier, was stripped down from the previous version back in 2021. The bill did pass out of committee, Senate committee, no opposition. I think there was maybe one public commenter that was opposed to something that wasn't related to SB 180 as far as I can tell. Went over to the Assembly. It passed out of the Senate 21-0, went over to the Assembly Natural Resource Committee, had a hearing. Jake presented the bill. I was not available that day, and did a great job presenting the bill. There were a lot of questions. Usually there are when Senate bills come over to the Assembly side. There's a lot more committee members and a lot more folks that I think are maybe not as familiar with sort of the subject matter as there are in the Senate. After the hearing, and there was some opposition, but not sure, well, I'll just say that there was some opposition, but I don't know, in my personal opinion, that it had a lot of merit, but in any event, it was opposition. But then also there was an amendment offered by Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. It was a friendly amendment. It just clarified what would happen if you had a designated basin in multiple counties and how that process would work to get others involved. But this bill, like I said, was the one that we thought was going to sort of bridge the gap between, facilitating some more robust local participation and recommendations to the Division of Water Resources without burdening them. Anyway, passed out. And then it went back to the Senate for concurrence on the amendment, and the Senate didn't concur. Then I think it went back to the Assembly, and they did not recede from their amendment. So there it sat. And then June 5th, there was a conference committee that was established to try to work out the differences, and we couldn't figure out what the problem was because, again, the amendment on the Assembly side was a friendly amendment. And I remember I was up in Senator Goycochea's office, and his assistant Toshi said, "Oh, we finally got notice of the conference committee," and it was, by that time it was about 8:30 on the last day of the session, p.m., and we all filed downstairs in the lobby and try to find Senator Goycochea and other members of the conference committee to work through this, and finally got everybody together. And then there were some folks there that were also very interested in this bill and this amendment, and their interest had nothing to do with Senate Bill 180. Their interest had to do with an issue related to another bill that the governor vetoed, and decided to try to use Senate Bill 180 as a vehicle to get some revised language back in a bill that, again, had nothing to do with water. Anyway, conference committee voted to agree on the amendment, and we were willing to accept that amendment if it meant moving this bill. And I think Senator Goycochea can talk about this. I think it just ran out of time at that point.
Again, Senator Goycochea, for the record, very different procedure there. The long and the short of it, and I don't know the reason why the Senate again wasn't going to bring that bill forward they weren't going to concur. And it went back to the Assembly. There was a vetoed bill that was amended into it in the conference committee. Ultimately, it was the death knell of the bill, but that was the only way they were even going to bring it to a conference committee. So, it wasn't getting any better by the last day of the session than it was the 60th day.
I think one of the things that's interesting, this was my 17th session lobbying in Nevada, and I don't know that I've ever seen a bill that passed every stage unanimously without a single vote against, and it never happened. I mean, again, there were no votes ever taken on that bill where it didn't gain support and full passage. And yet, because of just the way the games were played, that's not going to happen now.
And for the record, that was Doug Busselman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Geez, I'm going through these bills and I'm bringing up some painful memories for a lot of us.
Flashback time.
Senate Bill 258, this just would authorize the drilling of, conservation domestic wells in certain designated groundwater basins. That was approved. Senate joint resolution, which is just a resolution, but it talks about collaboration amongst Colorado River Basin states. A couple of unique things in there about requesting that evaporative losses be included in the allocation and management of Colorado River water, particularly as it relates to places like Lake Mead where a lot of water evaporates, and overall conservation measures. I do want to go back to just a couple of the bills that weren't CNRWA bills or sponsored by Senator Kokachia. AB 313, the Pitt Lakes bill from Assemblywoman Peters, had a hearing in Assembly Natural Resources Committee. That was a long hearing. It did pass out as Assembly Natural Resources with an amendment to basically just have it apply prospectively and not retroactively, to require mining companies to go back and backfill legacy pit lakes. So then that was amended just to require them to backfill new pit lakes or expansions of existing pit lakes. That bill didn't make it past there. And then Assembly Bill 387, which was the conjunctive water management bill that I know this group spent a lot of time on, the legislative committee spent a lot of time on. The legislative committee and a lot of different stakeholders, which ended up sort of getting split out into different camps as well. Those who love the bill, those who like the bill and were willing to work towards getting a bill that could at least move the ball a little bit, those who didn't like the bill, and those who were totally opposed to the bill. So people were kind of all over the place on this thing. In my opinion, it was too little too late. This was the first time stakeholders got together in earnest to actually talk about this was February 7th. 56 people were on a Zoom call to offer ideas on conjunctive water management, although individual groups or stakeholder organizations or whatever, it's sort of been working ahead of time, but February 7th is too late to try to get consensus on a bill of this magnitude, to try to combine a century and a half or Nevada water law from, to groundwater and surface water together and make it work and not have implications. And so Assemblyman Watts sponsored this bill. I know he would like to have seen something, but I think he recognized the difficulty. I mean, from the very beginning, to his credit, he recognized that this was going to be difficult and wasn't going to push something through that people were totally opposed to. And so we have the conversations. We had lots of conversations and lots of discussion, and attorneys and all kinds of people involved in this. And so, you know, I think for a lot of us, and maybe we're being too optimistic, we're going to try to utilize this interim to come up with something that maybe we can bring back to the 2025 session that has more consensus and has been given a lot more thought and consideration. So,
Commissioner Freyer, this is the bill, too, that it's very important for the members to know that our policies were a driver in this bill. And so the work we're doing here is very important, and it's recognized throughout the state. So kudos to the policies we pass here. We are a recognized organization that does very, very good work.
Thank you, Mr. Freya. That's a great point, and that's, you know, something that the legislative committee works on when the legislature isn't in session and this board considers and passes. But that policy statement specifically on conjunctive management was something that was brought up, was submitted by others as well as us to Assemblyman Watts for consideration and drafting of AB 387. The last thing I want to mention is the Division of Water Resources budget. There was a significant increase thanks to Senator Goicoechea, who is on the Senate Finance Committee and specifically on that subcommittee that oversees the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources budget. I think the additional funding was $3.4 million and maybe a dozen new positions, something like that. Do you remember? Division of Water Resources, an additional $3.4 million and 12 positions.
Again, Senator Goicoechea, for the record, I think by the time we finally shook that out, it was closer to 12 million in new positions for Division of Water Resources. There was like a $9 million staffing increase, and then we also plugged back in the backfill for the basin assessments. So significant increase, and again, truly we all recognize the fact that if we're going to get this thing ever worked out, leveled out, we're going to have a little better database, and so we made that commitment to clearly ensure that, and especially as we look at some of these other bills, whether it's critical management area or otherwise, again, it's going to fall on the Division of Water Resources to determine, is that basin over appropriated, is it over pumped, and to what extent? Because again, to make any part of this work, we've got to have a better database, and I think everyone in the state understands that. There's too many gaps in the data today. You're going to be sued and continue to be sued, be in litigation until we can actually get a definitive base and say, hey, this is where we are, this is what this basin, this is what the conflicts in the basin are. And that's the only way any of this is going to work and go forward. But I'd have to look at it again, the budget, but again, I'm not really one of them guys that really gets into the computer. I just know when we're making a good move, and we did shift a ton of resources. But again, folks, the state of Nevada wrote a $50 billion budget, and that's huge. So the fact that you got 10 million doesn't mean much when you're talking 50 billion. So with that, I'll close.
Yeah, and not to beat our chest too much. I mean, I can remember this group specifically last year or even before, 18 months ago, sitting here with the state engineer when he was giving us an update, and we were talking about their budget woes, their lack of staffing. They're just overall not getting the resources that they needed. And I think this group was the first one to write a letter of support to the governor to try to get some help. And we testified in the budget hearings and everything. And there's others who came on board as well. But I think this group has been very supportive of increasing the resources and capacity for the division. So that's it.
Jeff, I just want to address the membership and tell them how valuable the legislative committee was and always is during session. And this has pretty historically been led by Commissioner Norm Frey of Churchill County. And Norm, I would love for you to take an opportunity and recognize the members of your legislative committee. They do a lot of heavy lifting for us on these bills. It is a significant commitment of time because not only are they doing their homework on the bills, often they are testifying and they are meeting weekly or bi-weekly with Norm to discuss progress. So Norm, if you want to.
Yeah, and it's not just Central Nevada Regional Water Authority members. It is, to the extent, a lot of participation by Deborah Strickland, Commissioner Wagenseller, and this is why I didn't do it, because I'm prone to missing one. But also partners like Chris Mahana, who does a lot of work for Churchill County and other customers, irrigation district, a little bit of work for the wildlife. So they bring insights into our committee meetings. And I'm going to speak to it a little bit later during director comments, but our partnership with Farm Bureau is extremely important. And working with Doug, helping Farm Bureau with his bill, or our bill, because I'm very involved there too. But without our participation, then guidance for Jeff and Nina on the daily basis, I counted myself very fortunate not to have to be driving to Carson City to testify and going through the paces of these partisan meetings, and some of them got very partisan. So again, thank you, Jake.
Nancy.
Nancy Boland. Jake he's like Pete Goycochea said, good at the wordsmithing. And I sometimes, as Judge McKibben one time said in my first statement that I made in federal court one time, as just a farmer representing myself in federal court, beautiful experience. But he said, well, Mr. Frey made an artful question, or asked an artful question. He said, this is what I think he means. And I need that sometimes. Sometimes I am not very artful. Sometimes I am a little direct for some people.
It's part of your charm, Norm.
But anyway, Jake's work was, and he works from Eureka County. He is listed as a assistant or an alternate, but very good work. I appreciate it from all.
Madam Chair, this is Chris Mahana. May I say a couple words?
Yes, we need to move forward, so we're out of here by 1. But your brief comments are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up on what Norm just said, and Jeff. I think it's going to be very important in this interim session to try and work with stakeholders on this conjunctive management bill. I couldn't help but look at the irony. I turned 60 last month, and my uncle from Colorado came out, who's a water professional who I've consulted with on conjunctive management. And we were down in the basement and looking at some of my dad's old files that go back to the 60s and 70s, and just kind of lamenting on, keeping these. And I said, well, as soon as I toss one, we'll need it. So he literally opens a file cabinet drawer, randomly pulls out a file, opens it up, and I'm going to scan this and send it to everybody. This is a letter my dad wrote to Lyman McConnell, the TCID manager, in 1988, 35 years ago. Proposed legislation concerning the granting of underground water rights in areas of the state of Nevada where underground water and surface water are in hydrologic connection. So folks, we've been at this for 30, 40 years. And Assemblyman Watt's bill, it was far from a comprehensive conjunctive management bill. It was a incremental step forward to take what's in a legislative declaration and try and put a little more teeth into it along with the best available science. So I'll scan this and send it out. It's just kind of deja vu that, you know, we tried this 35 years ago. It's been tried in other interim sessions, and it's a tough one. And so we just need to work with stakeholders in the interim and hopefully get something done in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. There's been a request to move item 10 up, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take it out of order. Item 10 is an update on the Nevada Water Conservation and Infrastructure Initiative. This is a request from Jeff, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've talked about this in the past as well, and this is an update on the water infrastructure and water conservation program or initiative that was first started back in October when the Interim Finance Committee approved a request from the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for $100 million in ARPA dollars to basically, one-time allocation or appropriation of money to reduce water demand across the state, fix infrastructure, repair infrastructure. It was presented as really, being able to fix a lot of different things. With money being, used in different parts of the state across different sectors, ag, municipalities, water, wastewater, everything in between. There are some conditions on there, and we all understood that there was going to be a need to get this program up and running and money spent pretty quickly, and certainly by the end of 2026, which is the federal requirement for expenditure of these funds. As the program got started after October, so I think sometime in the beginning of this year, 2023, so like in January, February, of course there was a changeover in administration, changeover in leadership at DCNR. We learned a couple of things. One that we learned right off the bat was, well, this money wasn't quite as flexible as perhaps we had thought. And so we needed to work through that because, at least initially in that first meeting, appeared that the money could only be spent for certain things, primarily water and wastewater, similar to what you could get funding for through the state revolving loan funds. But then we were able to kind of figure a workaround to try to free up some of that money for more general types of water conservation programs and things of that nature. I'm on the advisory committee. I think I'm one of 12 people or so on the advisory committee to the director of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, who is administering this program through their Conserve Nevada program. Brandon Bishop specifically is a staff person running this program, very qualified, capable individual. I know the Division of Environmental Protection has been very much involved since they have experience running a loan and grant program. So pieces were being put into place. And then, as hopefully you all saw, I sent an email out, I think it was Wednesday, forwarding an email from DCNR announcing the opening of the program. With a Zoom meeting for prospective applicants on July 11th and a closing date for applications of August 7th.
Do they have any guidelines that they've released?
Not that I can find specifically, other than what is eligible. So water conservation, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, non-point source water, septic issues, irrigation and reclamation, reduction of water sources, green infrastructure, conservation management plans, storage projects, creation of new storage, cybersecurity improvements to water systems, land acquisitions for source water protection, and water safety. I want to go back to Senate Bill 176. Well, I want to go back to a couple things. When this was presented to the Interfinance Committee in October, Doug Busselman and I testified in support of the appropriations request in the work program. And we specifically brought up, at least I did, the idea of being able to utilize some of these funds for things like water planning and water right retirement, which are priorities, or at least have been priorities for CNRWA. And we got I thought we got a pretty positive response that, yeah, it seemed like these could be considered. And so it's still a little foggy about what is eligible, what isn't. The advisory committee did put together a matrix. Well, it was actually put together by DCNR staff. We looked at it, and honestly, the only way you'll know what's required or how it's going to be prioritized is if you you create an account at DCNR for this particular program, you go online and you work through the online web portal and start populating the fields to get to the next question to find out what's going to be required, which I started doing the other night. I can tell you that, again, the intent of the program is we need to conserve water resources in this state. But you got to go through a lot of steps and check a lot of boxes to get to that point. And so I put this on the agenda for further discussion. We did have some discussion about this at our last meeting, and there were some good ideas that came up, including perhaps using some of these funds to help do water resource plans, help domestic well owners deepen their wells, a few other things. And I wanted to continue the discussion today. However, I had already sent out the agenda by the time that this was announced on Wednesday. And what I am suggesting here at this point is that we're not going to have time to have another meeting. I mean, maybe we would. If you want us to do it, we can put one together. But prior to August 7th, I intend to submit an application on behalf of this group for funding. And I've confirmed with DCNR that if I submit an application, doesn't mean that this board is bound to it. I mean, only if and only the application is accepted at that point when, they send out an agreement that someone has to sign. That's obviously something that this board needs to
We have to authorize.
authorize it. But up until that point, I feel comfortable submitting an application. I don't want to lose this opportunity. This is a huge once in a generation opportunity, I believe, for CNRWA member counties and their constituents. And so the question is, what would we request money for? I would highly recommend this board consider requesting money to purchase water rights from Welling Cellars and basins, priority basins, that we can figure out what those are, and we could probably use SB 176 as a very good jumping off point. We might want to consider submitting a smaller application for funding for water resource plans, but it would have to be tied a lot to the conservation portion of that. But it's still a possibility as well. I mean, that one would be a much smaller grant, but I'm talking about $10–15 million for water rights retirement. I mean, that's a huge, huge undertaking. I'm just letting you know right now, if we were to be awarded funding for a program like that, we would have to hire, I mean, we have the authority, in my opinion. We certainly have the interest, I believe. Of course,
We have the data,
we have data, we have,
our studies.
and if we don't have it, we have the relationship and information that we can work with the Division of Water Resources on. we don't have the capacity at this point. That's not something I have the capability to do or expertise to do, so we would have to hire certain expertise on a contract basis, perhaps, maybe an attorney, maybe, you know, part-time program manager, something. But if we were going to go and do this, and we're awarded $10 million or $15 million, we'd want to make sure that we have everything in place to manage this correctly and do it, you know, and have the controls and accountability. So that's my recommendation. I know that this is probably not what you're expecting from this agenda item, but now's the time.
Yeah, Norm, go ahead.
Norm Frey for the record. One thing that this would allow us to do in the interim session is show that a water right retirement program could work and start building some very visible benefits for future legislation to bring in state dollars to operate it. And it is kind of a evolutionary thing that it came to us today as somewhat of a surprise to all of us. But we need to consider granting some authority and be willing to hold whatever meeting we need to grant any final authority to do it. But I'm totally in favor of taking on a project like that, and I have some ideas on people that we could get involved with it to make it fly.
Jeff, do you know if a program like this has been implemented successfully anywhere else in the U.S.? As I'm always fond of saying, I borrow whenever possible, because when I reinvent the wheel, it looks like a triangle or something.
So, Madam Chair, there are examples of where this program has been implemented, Kansas, I believe Texas, and in the Harney Basin in Southern Oregon. Those programs are a little bit different because, well, first of all, you have to also recognize that in Nevada, water law is unique as it is in pretty much every state, and being able to purchase water rights can either be voluntary or involuntary, I guess, in other places, but Nevada, I mean, that's one clear criteria. It has to be voluntary. Two, it has to consider prior appropriation and how that affects the value of a water right, for example. And we realize that this is a foray into a much longer, hopefully, commitment, as Mr. Frey indicated. And we want to be strategic and do this right so that we can demonstrate that this is successful. And also, you know, this isn't something that is a standalone program. This is something that has to be coordinated with the Division of Water Resources and the State Engineer's Office, because, quite frankly, the intent of the program and the value of the program is being able to offer those water right holders who have junior rights that are looking at the possibility of not being able to maintain those rights through some sort of order, curtailment, or otherwise, that would either reduce or eliminate their water rights. So this is an opportunity to perhaps provide some way of helping those individual water right holders while at the same time helping to do what the intent of the program is to bring overpumped basins back into balance, and, you know, the other benefit of improving environmental conditions as well. So there's a lot of coordination and partnerships that need to take place for this to work, which I think is something that we could certainly do. And I don't even remember the original question, Madam Chair. But
my original question was if there were programs similar to this operating across the United States, anywhere, so we could begin collecting the information about those programs. Those would be good jumping off points for us to put the guidelines together for our own program if we were able to secure the funding.
Okay, I'll answer that quickly, and I think Jake wants to make some comments. There are, I'm not sure that the other state models are necessarily are things that would work entirely in the state of Nevada. There are things that we can pick and choose from
Yes,
individual
exactly.
programs, absolutely. And then there, of course, there are federal programs as well. And I'm gonna, it sounds like Jake is gonna provide some comments as well.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I
Yeah, go
can.
ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. And I know that Chris Mahana has his hand up too, and Laurel Saito was going to say something, but I'll just jump in here that the Nature Conservancy put together a nice glossy handout for SB 176 that might be useful for folks to see similar type programs in other states. So that's available. So I'm not trying to steal Laurel's thunder, but that's something that can show similar programs. Another one that's interesting to look at is out of the San Luis Valley in Colorado under the Rio Grande Water Conservation District. I can't remember their exact name, but right now they have an RFP out as we speak, collecting applications for folks to retire water. And the state of Colorado passed a Senate bill there and allocated $30 million just for that individual basin. So there are some good examples. There's even an RFP, that could potentially be borrowed from type of thing too. So, and that's, I don't know, Madam Chair, maybe if you wanted Laurel, she could provide a bit more information if you wanted it on other programs in other states.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Jake was saying, that the Rio Grande program is using ARPA funds, just like this one that Jeff is talking about. So I think it's a good one for us to take a look at, because they're under the same time constraints as we are. And I think also they've had a history of retiring water rights in that basin, so they've already worked on kind of valuing the water rights and things like that. So I think it'd be good for us as we figure out how to do this in Nevada to talk to those guys, because I think they probably have a lot of lessons learned that will help us out.
And for the record, that was Laurel Saito? Was that
Yes,
you, Laurel?
sorry,
No, that's
Laurel.
okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Boland.
Yes, this is Commissioner Boland. I'm not Commissioner Boland anymore. Nancy
Well,
Boland. I just wanted to ask.
We still address.
Yeah,
we
I
still
know.
address you.
Well, yeah, I never used to get triangles. Mine always ended up in circles. But anyway, I just wanted to ask Jeff, if we get this money, would we be able to use it as matching funds for like federal programs in this case too?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Well, I can tell you that the original SB 176 bill would have allowed that. Under this program, since it's ARPA dollars, I'm not sure.
Oh.
But
You can't match federal with federal.
well, they're probably not, but I mean, I think the intent here is to leverage funds as well. I mean, that's in this $100 million grant program.
Yeah, Senator, go ahead.
Yeah, Senator Goycochea for the record. Yeah, I think clearly that's the intent down the road, but again, there's a round of meeting. There's one on the 11th. There's going to be another one on the 14th. I think this is a long ways from being soup yet. I'm just going to say I did reach out when 176 didn't pass to the governor's office, and there, at that point, that was early on, right after the session, some support for an executive order to stand 176 up. So again, I think they've moved back away from that, trying to figure out how to use these ARPA money. But again, I think we're a long ways from soup, even though there is, and again, $100 million we're talking about right now. We'll see where there's a lot of what ifs and whereases and what could happen with this in a very short time frame. And I know there's a meeting on the 11th that's going to kind of stand up, and they're talking about starting to accept applications. I know there's another stakeholder group behind that on the 14th that we're kind of figuring out, okay, wait a minute, what's this going to look like? There's a lot of loose ends here, folks, but there is some money. And really, I think we need to don't lose sight of that. And I agree, agencies probably should submit applications under these new guidelines that we think are going to come forward on the 11th, I believe.
That's pretty much it. So I guess what I would Since this is not agendized as an action item,
That's what we were just talking about.
so I guess I'll just tell you what I think I should do. And,
Why don't you just surprise us?
okay, I'm just going to go ahead and submit an application on behalf of CNRWA for funding for a water rights retirement program with an amount to be determined, but it will be in the millions of dollars. And I just have to look at a map to kind of see where those priority basins are relative to other needs around the state and be realistic about what the request is, because I can tell you, full disclosure, as you know, I also work with the Humboldt River Basin Water Authority, and there's certainly some needs up in that area as well. So we just got to be cognizant of, making sure that we statewide, I think that's really the goal here, is statewide, target those priority basins. I'll think a little bit more about submitting a smaller application on behalf of CNRWA for some funding to assist counties with updating water resource plans, or at least the conservation portion of those plans as well.
Jeff, I wouldn't just think about it, I would do it.
Okay.
And I think that we all need to be cognizant that we may need to get together. The grant meeting is on the 11th, I believe. So we may need to get together for a very quick meeting, Zoom meeting, and take up the issue of maybe the need for funding to identify potential purchases that could be made from junior water right owners, or just need to be able to make some expenditures from our current budget that we can't make them today, but if we hold a special meeting, we can take some quick action and get this thing greased to where when we submit our application, we have some more solid information.
Madam Chair, Chris Mahana, can I just add a brief comment to what Jeff's proposing?
Yeah, hold on just a minute. Chris, I think Jeff was going to respond to Commissioner Frey's comment.
I'll just say this, as far as an application is concerned, honestly, I don't think we have time, nor is it necessary at this point to identify specific water rights that we would seek to purchase. I think as long as we have some criteria in terms of how we would approach those water right purchases or request, volunteers, if you will, I think that's probably good for now, but I think the first thing we need to do is identify exactly where we want to prioritize. I mean, just because we've got a willing seller in some basin that may be over appropriated doesn't necessarily mean that's the best bang for the buck here for the state or for the basin. So, but look, if you think it's possible to get together before the 7th, then you'll be able to see exactly what it is that'll be submitted. I'm all for that.
I think that answers my question on that. I don't think it would hurt to start compiling a list. We know the basins, so have that list, and the other list is lists of appropriators in those basins, and we will start at the bottom of the list as far as the most junior and work up, because they're the ones most at risk of losing their water right to prior appropriation.
Chris Mahana?
Yeah, I guess and Jeff kind of touched on it, and to Norm's point, I think it would be wise to not tie ourselves in strictly to targeting junior priority water rights, particularly when you look at surface water, groundwater interactions. Jay Dixon and I are contemplating a talk either before the August 1st State Engineer Conjunctive Management Symposium, or probably more likely a panel at NWRA. And Kip can talk more about this, that we may want to be more strategic in water right acquisitions that are capturing surface water. And so that may not be a junior priority right. So I guess I would just caution in tying ourselves strictly to junior priority water rights. And, you know, a lot of those juniors may be a permitted water right that's had 20 extensions on and aren't actually pumped and maybe never will be. So money could be spent and see no real benefit from it. So I would just caution to be strategic in how we go about purchasing those water rights.
Thank you, Chris. And we really can't get too deep into the weeds on this morning because it is only agendized as a discussion item. So the next step would actually be putting some applications together and then moving forward from there. Thank you. Is there anything else on this item? Then let's go back to our regular agenda order. We'll move to item number 8. Yeah, Pete.
Thank you, Madam
Senator.
Chair. Senator Greg Cuccia for the record. I've got to beat feet. I've got a 2 o'clock in Reno for
That's
Vet
fine.
Med. So
We
I want to
really
thank you all for
appreciate
the
it.
opportunity to be here and
Yeah.
and talk to you. And it's
Thank you so much
this
for
is an
joining us.
opportunity we don't want to miss. But I'm very concerned about, just as Chris and everyone else is talking. There's a lot of directions you can go out of this, and maybe there isn't enough money to go around. So thank you all, and really appreciate being here, seeing a lot of my old friends. Thank you.
Pete, we appreciate you so much. You're going to be, I'm sure you've heard this 100 times, you are really going to be missed. Yeah, thank you. All right, we're going to move back to item number 8. Kip, you ready? Item 8 is a presentation on the Nevada Water Resource Initiative, updating estimates of Nevada's water availability. We are really pleased to have this morning with us Kip Allender, who is a hydrologist with the Nevada Division of Water Resources. And I was just going to recommend that, Kip, come on up here and get yourself set up.
There we go.
I assume that's, he's gonna bring it up, so, while waiting for the presentation to come. While waiting for the presentation to come up, I just wanna thank you, Madam Chair, thank you, Jeff, for the invitation to come here to talk about the Nevada Water Resource Initiative. This is a program that was kicked off last January. It was approved. It was funded through the state finance committee, interim finance committee in January, using ARPA funds. It's about a $8 million project, which includes matching funds from the USGS as well as in-kind services from the Desert Research Institute to help to fund this program. So this is the program was initiated in January. Work began there, and one of the first items was identifying demonstration basins, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that fits into the overall program. But those demonstration basin projects were initiated, were kicked off in June, and the way they were kicked off was through public meetings within those basins, you'll see it's in the Pine Valley in the Pine Valley and Railroad Valley basins. And so we met with the local stakeholders to discuss the overall projects and the goals and to get public support and buy-in for that. So it makes sense that since these two basins are within the CNRWA member basin areas, to come before you and as well to talk about what is going on with our water science investigations in those basins within the overall context of the Nevada Water Resource Initiative. All right. Okay. Yeah, and this is going to be interesting, trying to give a presentation when it's so far above me. I'm going to sit back just a little bit, maybe. And anyway, I'll be happy to take questions on this. If there's a burning question, I'd say anybody from the board, please interrupt me, or we can just wait to the end and have general discussion and questions then. All right, there we go. Thank you. So the title, again, my name is Kip Allender. I'm a hydrogeologist with the Division of Water Resources, just make sure that's clear on the record.
So Kip, we're not seeing your slides on Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Laurel. I'll continue to work on that.
I'm seeing it.
Okay, looks good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm assuming you're hearing me just fine, but if not, please let me know. So the title of the talk is the Nevada Water Resource Initiative, and it's about updating the estimates of Nevada's water availability across the state. This is mostly the same version of the presentations that were given to Railroad Valley as well as to the Pine Valley stakeholders without the details, a lot of the details that were provided by DRI and USGS. It's more of a broader overview of that, those discussions. Next slide, please. So to talk about the Nevada Water Resource Initiative, we want to put it into context of how water science has evolved in the state of Nevada, and as well as the origins of the perennial yield and our understanding of the availability of water across the state. And so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about where the initial groundwater program came. And so it was all really initiated in 1939 with the Underground Water Act that was passed that brought the groundwater from the state of Nevada into the public domain. It just like surface water it was later on, after surface water was recognized to be a public resource, that groundwater was also recognized to be a public resource, and that it should be managed similarly to how surface water is being managed, and through an appropriation process at that time under the state engineer's office. So one of the things it really did was it gave the clear authority for the state engineer at that time to appropriate the groundwater throughout the state. And as we know it nowadays, we use the groundwater basins as our management areas for groundwater across the state. But initially with the Groundwater Act, that was not established. They did recognize within the act that Nevada, it consists of basins, and that's where groundwater occurs, but it didn't delineate those basins. That was done much later. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And it also did not establish that perennial yield would be the basis of management within the state. It gave the authority to the state engineer to manage it effectively, however that needs to be done. A lot of this information comes from these state engineer biannual reports that have this link here. I don't know if the presentation is going to be available later on the CNRWA site, but we'll also make it available on the state engineer's webpage. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where the basins came from as well as where the perennial yield came from. So next slide, please. So when the Underground Water Act was enacted in 1939, the state engineer at the time, it was Alfred Smith, he recognized that, you know, we need to have some sort of understanding how much water is available in the ground and can be appropriated so that we could safely develop Nevada's groundwater resources over time. And so we looked at some of the extracted some of the excerpts from his reports indicating how he was seeing the groundwater system at the time. So this first one states, in an area where underground water development is being made, careful consideration must be given to the supply and the rate of recharge in relation to water being pumped. And it also further stated that if more water is pumped out than is added each year, the water table will fall below any economical lift and failure will result. And he also wanted to make it clear that in Nevada, we are trying to avoid such failures. And so this really points out that the state engineer was forward-looking at that time to try to protect and preserve, but use and manage the resources. But along with this, it was indicated that, look, in order to manage our resources, we have to understand those. And so this last statement says, adequate long-range planning for the development of the state's water resources in order that these resources may be properly safeguarded and brought to high beneficial use should require our immediate consideration and best thought. Next slide, please. And so with that, they began discussions with the USGS who had been in the state managing, or I shouldn't say managing, but monitoring surface water resources with stream gauges and measuring flow, and also doing some initial groundwater work, especially down in the Las Vegas area, in the Artesian Basin down there. And so they began thinking about planning on how can we quantify how much water is available. And so they put together this concept of this program for the state of Nevada called the Nevada Groundwater Program, and initiated it in 1945, and through a systematic effort to investigate the water resources, and in particular the groundwater resources across the state. And this was first brought to publication through what are called the Water Resource Bulletin series. And I think most folks here are familiar with these publications, as they're the basis for a lot of our estimates for perennial yield across the state. The work proceeded for around 15 years and didn't cover as much of the state as they had hoped, because the investigations were fairly detailed. It was occurring in areas that were already getting some pressure or having groundwater development, or in areas that really felt like there was opportunities for groundwater development or better opportunities, but it wasn't proceeding across the state fast enough. And so in 1960, they revised the program and to do for more rapid investigations of the basins in the state, and they called this the Groundwater Resources Reconnaissance Series. And they took a lot of the methods and techniques that were developed within the Water Resource Bulletin series and applied those for more rapid assessments. But the idea at the time was that these investigations were just to be kind of just a coarse high level, and that at some point in time we'd come back and do a more refined investigation to better quantify the water resources in those areas as needed. So there was about 45 of the Water Resource Bulletin reports that were published through around 1976. And then there's 60 of the Groundwater Resource Reconnaissance Series reports that were published through 1974 was the last one of those released. And these eventually, and I'll talk more about this, became the original basis for the perennial yields estimates for Nevada's groundwater basins. Next slide, please. So, but in the context of using perennial yield for managing Nevada's groundwater resources, we need to understand that it's not as simple as just knowing how much water is entering and leaving these groundwater systems in the state, that we could just manage by that number. I mean, through time, that's kind of what we've done, but it's led to a few problems because, and as was being discussed earlier today, is we realize that groundwater and surface water are connected. And so just think of it as an available reservoir, this perennial yield. It just doesn't quite work like that. There's additional considerations that we really have to be thinking about to more effectively manage our groundwater resources. And so one of those concepts is related to the idea that the groundwater, surface water are connected, and when you pump a well, where's that water really coming from? Is it just coming from a perennial yield reservoir? No, it's not. It's coming from different sources. And this slide right here illustrates the concept that, when you have a system that's in equilibrium, all the water that enters as recharge eventually discharges either through evapotranspiration through phreatophytes or riparian vegetation or through shallow subsoil evaporation, or it discharges to a stream. But once you put a well in, it starts to change that dynamic. And initially when you're pumping that water, it is coming from the ground. It's coming from groundwater storage. And so this chart that's on the left kind of demonstrates this concept. And we call this a capture curve. And it says that when you initially pump, all that water that's sourcing the well is from change in storage. But as time goes on, you start to increase these gradients from the well towards other areas and boundaries where the water is entering the system or is connected to the surface in the system. And so you start to decrease the discharge to the river, or you start to lower the water table underneath the phreatophytic plants, which reduces the amount that's discharging to the atmosphere through ET, or is starting to deplete the streams. And as time goes on, those sources continue to increase while the source from the ground itself decreases. And so that this curve on the left shows that, storage changes where all that water you're pumping comes from initially, but as time goes on, it's increasingly coming from the capture of ET as well as the capture of streams or springs. And so this is the hydrologic perspective and how it looks and how it works in the real world. But if we, next slide please, but if we think about it in terms of water management, we can see that you can think of it as the water where you're pumping is initially coming from aquifer reservoir use. We also consider this transitional storage in the aquifer. That's where it's initially coming from. But over time, that ET component has been historically thought of as really what the perennial yield reservoir is. But there's this unintended consequence, depending on where you're pumping from and what the aquifer conditions are, that you're going to be taking water from streams and springs that may already have been appropriated and through senior appropriations as surface water rights. And so this leads to potential conflict. It's not intended, but it's something that's happened, and we're fully aware of it in the Humboldt and working on this a lot in the Humboldt, as I'm sure everybody here is fully aware of. But this is kind of the same concept in terms of groundwater management. And so this is one of the unintended consequences of just managing by perennial yield without thinking about that extra component of the connection of groundwater and surface water. Next slide, please. So some of the limitations of the perennial yield as we see it for groundwater management that we really have to be able to work through and consider as we're moving forward with development of water resources in the state, as well as the existing development of water resources, is that the perennial yield is useful for us, and it certainly is important, and it does establish the upper limit of how much water can be safely developed from a basin. But really, in order for us to manage the water resources in a more sustainable way, we have to know about how that water is moving through the system, where it's coming from and where it's discharging, so that we can manage where pumping is occurring more effectively, so that we can reduce the unintended consequences and capture of streams and springs that are already fully appropriate, and to protect existing water rights. And so as a consequence, it's really important actually where pumping is taking place. You just can't put it anywhere in a basin and call it good. It's really important to recognize that it's going to have a different impact depending on where it is and what those aquifer properties are. And so that's an important consideration for updating our science, is to be able to have a better sense of where is the water entering, not just how much, but where is it entering into our groundwater basins, and then where and how much is discharging, so that we can do better. The other thing about some of the old science that was done, this work is old. It's greater than 50 years old, and they used old technology and techniques. They didn't have computers, they didn't have satellites, they didn't have microprocessors and sophisticated equipment for measuring things really closely. They did a great job at the time and produced a lot of great estimates that have been very useful and have served the state great, but it is old science, and we're dealing with being increasingly challenged on that science. For all the decisions were being made, there's a lot of reference saying, well, this is based on information that's really old, and so it's something that's really important for the state, is to better understand our water resources as they are now with the advances that have been made over the last 50 years. Next slide, please. So that's what this the Nevada Water Resource Initiative is. It's really an effort to update our understanding of water availability across the state, where and how much is existing in the state, so that we can better manage the water resources. Next slide. So think of it, the Nevada Water Resource Initiative, as the 2020s version of the Nevada Groundwater Program from the 1940s through the early 1970s. That's the concept, is to go through and update our understanding of the water resources, but using modern technology and approaches. A lot of science has been done since then, and there's a lot more tools that we have available, especially with the advent of computers and processors and the processing speeds that we have nowadays. Ultimately, the goal is to re-estimate the water budgets across the state, just like we did initially. But more specifically now is not just how much is occurring in each of these basins, but where. Where is it specifically occurring, so that we can be more effective in our management. And then ultimately to develop a lot of the resources and programs and tools that we need to be able to use this information to more effectively manage the resources and make it available to the public and water resource management agencies to be able to make decisions, so that when they're submitting applications to our agency, they understand what we're trying to do, and they understand what they're trying to do, and to help them to be able to make better decisions and to understand where it is that, the way we're thinking about things, and to and understand what kind of decisions we're possibly going to be able to make just based on the way the water actually exists. Next slide, please. So the program is being carried out by the Desert Research Institute and the USGS. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the different components. So some of the components of the program are statewide efforts to develop these data sets that we need to better understand and quantify the water resources, while others is just working and focusing on methods and techniques, because we just don't have the scope or the finances to be able to do this across the state at this time. And so we're trying to develop these methods and techniques that we know are going to be more useful and applicable across the state, that other folks can use, as well as ourselves, to update components of the water budget. So talking specifically, we are updating the ET discharge across the state of Nevada in this Nevada Water Resource Initiative. Desert Research Institute is going to carry out this task, and it's really synonymous to what we've done in the Humboldt River Basin, which has already been done. And that's what that image is showing there, is the discharge map. And it's a very detailed map, if you look at it, that shows where the discharge is occurring and how much is occurring from those locations. And what I'm not showing is that we have this data set for the Humboldt River Basin that extends all the way back to the early 1980s. For every year, we know what the overall discharges are and have a much better picture of the discharge. The methods have been developed. They just need to be applied, and that's why we're able to start this process of applying this method across the state. So that's one of the outcomes of the Nevada Water Resource Initiative, is a new estimate of ET discharge across the state. The other is if we don't measure, we can't really understand it. We know pumping pretty well in more recent times, but historically, we don't have a great grasp of how much pumping has occurred. There are different methods and approaches to estimating that pumping, and those are being used to develop a pumping database across the state, so that we have a more complete picture of how much water is being used from where in the state. And so DRI is doing the agricultural pumping, because they're using some of the methods they've developed and tools. And then the USGS is participating in that pumping as well by doing non-agricultural pumping, so industrial, municipal, and mining, other larger uses. This will not quantify for small uses like small stock or domestic wells. That's beyond the scope. And then on the other side, we're developing, it's beyond the scope to be able to develop recharge maps for the whole basin, for the whole state, or understand interbasin flow at each of the potential boundaries where interbasin flow is occurring. And so the Nevada Water Resource Initiative is focusing on developing the tools and methods for developing those estimates. And so the USGS and DRI are working on the recharge on a new method. And I think a lot of people here are familiar with the historic method used. It's called the Maxey-Eakin method. It was pretty good at the time, but it was pretty primitive, and it's really, really rough calculation in many areas. It's held up in a lot of areas. In other areas, it's been off by quite a bit. And we have so much more information nowadays that we can use to help better understand where recharge is occurring and how much that is. Also, interbasin flow. A lot of the interbasin flow estimates from the past are based on the imbalance between the recharge and the discharge, and it was assumed to be related to interbasin flow if the boundary looked like it could sustain interbasin flow. There's a lot better and newer methods that we can use to more directly estimate interbasin flow, and so we're going to be developing those tools to and recommendations for the best approaches for confirming or constraining what interbasin flow values might be across the state, because that's really important in our flow systems, and understanding our flow systems and being able to manage more effectively when we have multi-basin flow systems. All right, next slide, please. Another important component of the Nevada Water Resource Initiative was increased monitoring across the state. And now we're talking about stream flow monitoring, water levels, precipitation gauges, ET, evapotranspiration gauges, across the state, and also more focused in our demonstration basins. So that's a substantial component. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the application of these methods. So we're developing all these data sets and then developing these methods, but we want to demonstrate how they're going to be used to update the water budgets and our understanding of the water resources in the basins across the state by demonstrating in two particular basins, and that's Pine Valley and Railroad Valley. All right, and so that everyone always asks, and it's a really great question, why those two valleys? I have to say that process of choosing those two valleys was very involved. We had a lot of discussion within our own agency, as well with our partners, the USGS and DRI, to come up with some broad conditions that we wanted to have for a demonstration, as well as the needs from our division for where we could really stand to benefit from updated science in the water resources. And so Pine Valley and Railroad Valley were chosen. One of the major criteria was we wanted one basin that was hydrologically closed, so it was internally drained hydrologically, may have interbasin flow. And then the other criteria was a basin that had a river or creek or stream that runs through it that's hydrologically open, that drains out to some other stream or river. It was not hydrologically closed, so hydrologically open. And so the criteria that we used that we came down to Railroad Valley was it obviously fit the closed basin criteria. But one of the things about Railroad Valley, maybe a lot of people know or don't know, is it's the valley in Nevada with the second most unappropriated water. It's got water availability still, according to the perennial yield estimates and how much water has been developed. You know, this is obviously a target.
You should never have said that out loud.
Hey, and Strickland here, I want to point out that Railroad Valley is in a huge debate, as you know, with lithium, so.
Yeah, and there's a lot of applications, and that was one of our considerations. Well, there's a lot of applications for water in that basin related to lithium development. And so, you know, we're like, well, and there's more to it than just those two items. If you look back at the original work, there's a huge imbalance between the recharge and the discharge. The discharge far exceeds the recharge in that basin. And the original authors invoked interbasin flow to explain it. And when we developed the original perennial yield, we assigned it that larger number. And so there's concern that that imbalance, you know, it may be because one of the estimates is off and not because interbasin flow. And in particular, the discharge estimates, the ET estimates, when we look back at those, it's in a huge expanse of area that has small shrub-like vegetation that was just given an assigned rate, 0.4 feet per year, without a whole lot of work that went into that, as well as the playa was given a discharge rate of around 1/10 of a foot per year. And nowadays we know that that playas discharge almost no water at all. And so it's really suspect, and so we're concerned about that. And so before we go ahead and give out all the water in that basin, we want to make sure that it's there. So Railroad Valley makes a lot of sense to us, and so that's one of the focuses. For Pine Valley, the situation is a little bit different. We have some, after doing the Humboldt work, we've really realized that there's some limitations in our understanding in Pine Valley. In particular, there's a lot of carbonate rock around there, as well as the alluvial basin aquifer, but it's unclear how those two aquifers are connected or not connected, and what the continuity and extent of that carbonate rock aquifer is, and how far out does it extend? Does it go well beyond the basin and create contribute to a much larger regional system? And so we have these large questions about the hydrogeology and the hydrogeologic framework for that basin. In addition, there's springs that are drying up in the valley, and then there's other springs that aren't changing flow at all. And so it's really complex, and there's a lot of pressure around there from all the mine dewatering that's occurring. And so it made sense that Pine Valley would be one of our demonstration basins. Okay, yeah, next slide, please. So this slide is synonymous with the Pine Valley. The objectives for the demonstration basin are pretty simple objectives. It's to re-estimate the water budget over a 3-year period, using the information and data collected over a 3-year period. And then from that information, as well as all the other information, hydrogeologic information that can be gained, to redevelop the conceptual model for how the hydrogeologic framework for the basin, basically where the groundwater is, how it's moved, what kind of geologic structure and formations are controlling the movement of that groundwater in those basins. And then also, as part of the analysis is, let's look at the trends of groundwater and surface water. We have a lot more data than they had back in the 40s and 60s through early 70s. That's available to us to better understand the water resources. So we want to take a look at all that extra data. The other one is the mines have been collecting lots and lots of data, especially in Pine Valley, and that data is available to us as well to help us better understand and characterize the water resources. This is all funded by ARPA money, which has a deadline, and so this is a 4-year project intended to be completed in 2027 for both basins. Next slide, please. All right, so last slide. So the Nevada Water Resource Initiative is the summary. It's really, the intent of the initiative is to benefit the broader water resource community, and the concept here is by providing better science and understanding of our water resources in our demonstration basins. It'll provide new useful tools and approaches that can be used by the water resource community to understand what works better and what doesn't, as far as doing applications for water or moving water rights around. It's going to provide a lot of the additional data and resources that everybody needs to be more effective in how we manage the resources. And ultimately, it's going to benefit just about everybody. And I'm just going to say the list is there. But it's everybody in the state. It's the entire public. For us as an agency, it's going to benefit us. The perennial yield, it's been an important part of how we manage the water resources, and it's going to remain to be an important part. But we need to recognize the limitations of that and be able to manage more effectively, recognizing those constraints. And then wherever we get enough information, and it makes sense, we'll update the perennial yields for the basins. If they're changing or need to be changed, we'll update those. Ultimately, it's going to make us better agency at managing the water resources, give us hopefully tools and resources so we can move a little quicker in our application process and reviewing our applications and making the decisions. A lot of the information is going to help us inform and reduce the existing conflict and as well as future conflict and not allow that to occur. And ultimately, for conjunctive management of groundwater and surface water systems, that's an important goal for our agency as well as for everybody. Everybody understands that, and this is the type of information we need to be more effective with conjunctive management. The ultimate goal, of course, is the sustainable development and use of the water resources across the state, and this is what we feel is needed to actually be able to achieve that. So the last thing I'm going to state here is that these are 2 demonstration basins. Our funding is limited to this work with the idea that we're going to be able to secure future funding, however we do it, to continue this program to start doing other basins. And we're hoping that we can start a basin every year or a couple basins every year and just keep this program going, but we need this initiative to develop the tools and resources and approaches and finalize approaches so that we can move forward more efficiently and effectively in the future with the other basins and ultimately do the rest of the state. So I think that last slide is just information about my contact and information. So with that, take any questions or discussion that anybody has.
This is Chris Wagenseller, Esmeralda County. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
There's a 1973 DWR report for Fish Lake Valley where they estimate 1/3 to 1/4 of all irrigation water returns to the groundwater. Is that still considered accurate?
Can you repeat how much? 1/3 to how much?
It estimated between 1/4 and 1/3 of irrigation water returns to the groundwater. Is that still accurate?
I would say that's generally about the range that we consider for irrigation water. That it depends on the application method and the efficiencies, but flood irrigation returns a whole lot more water to the system than the high efficiency sprinkler systems that we have these days. So I'd say historically 1/3 to 1/2 is probably realistic depending on what those methods are. I think one thing to address your question here is that application methods across the state have been evolving over time, and especially since the reconnaissance reports. And with the high efficiency sprinkler systems that we have nowadays, we have a lot less returning. We're pumping less, but there's less returning. The net consumption is still about the same, but there's definitely less returning. But yeah. So I would say those efficiencies are definitely going down, though. So they're evolving. Is I guess what I'm trying to explain.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kip. Authority members, any other questions? We have time for one more question, and then we want to break for lunch. One more question? Thank you, Kip. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lunch is here. I want to take, what do you think, 10 minutes? Just, get up and grab your lunch. The audience is invited. There's plenty of food back there. Please help yourself. And we are going to, actually, I want to continue a portion of the meeting while everybody's grabbing their food. I'd like really quickly to move to item number 9, which is the appointment of a committee to review and recommend to the CNRWA board updates to our functions, mission, activities, priorities, and bylaws. And Jeff, you'll break the food out there. And the first thing I want to do is ask for volunteers. If anybody, in addition to Norm Frey, would like to serve on this committee.
I have been voluntold.
Voluntold, that's right. Are there?
This is Gary Pree. I would like to be on that committee.
Gary, I would love to have you on it. So Norm, Gary, anybody else? I, of course, will volunteer, and I'll be chairing this committee. Anyone else? Chris Wagenseller or Nancy Boland, are you interested?
What does it entail?
It is, if you look at your agenda, it's item number 9. It's the appointment of a committee to review and recommend to the board updates to our functions, mission, activities, priorities, and bylaws. It's a purely administrative committee.
Okay, I'll do that.
Half a dozen pages to review and think about.
It's not much. There, it's all in your backup right now.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Nancy Boland. I don't want to be on the committee because I was on the first one.
Okay.
But I just would like to make a comment, though, for those that are interested. Earlier on, Jeff was talking about how we are taken very seriously now when we come out in legislative committee meetings. The thing is, when we started, and you were here and along with me, when we were started, we were viewed as only an organization that was opposed to the Southern Nevada Water Authority's plan to pump from north down to Las Vegas. And most of the people at the legislature just, they kind of looked at us like we were the opposition to everything Las Vegas. But the importance of all of our mission statements and the purpose of our organization, over the years, we've reinforced it and reinforced it. And that's gone a long way to giving this organization the credibility that it has now. So,
Yes, that very well said. Thank you, Nancy. All right, so the way it stands, the committee is your chair, Joni Eastley, Commissioner Norm Fry, Commissioner Gary Perea, and Chris Wagenseller. So we'll be holding a few meetings, and we will bring some recommendations back to the board. I thought that would be a better use of our time, rather than having the entire board sit in a meeting and hash out all this stuff. And that said, we are finished with item number 9. Jeff has everything set up. Please go grab some food. We are going to be in recess until 12:30, and my plan is to be out of here by 1 or before. Thank you. All right, it's 12:30. I would like to reconvene this meeting. Jeff, you just took a big mouthful of outstanding Mexican food, but I want to move to item number 11, which is the Executive Director Report to CNRWA. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Touchy little mic, isn't it?
Yeah, if you touch the base, it shuts off.
Sorry, Mike. I'll make this pretty quick in the interest of time. In the packet, well, back up and say, so I think in the packet I included a drought monitor report from June 27th. That's in there, and really just to put that in there to show what a difference a year makes. This time last year, or at least as of June 28th, basically 100% of the state was in some type of drought with, you know, more than half of the state in pretty severe drought, or at least extreme drought, and almost a quarter of the state in exceptional drought. This year, this date, or the week of the 20th of June, you can see where we are, and it's pretty encouraging news. But again, it's only 1 year, so we'll keep tuned. Let's see. The other update is we still have not seen any order or ruling, I should say, come from the Supreme Court in regard to the report from the Commission to study the adjudication of water law cases in the state of Nevada that met 7 times over the last, well, from June 2022 through the end of 2023. That report was actually filed by that commission on December 27th and was heard by the Supreme Court on March 21st. And just as a refresher, that would basically require any district court judge in the state of Nevada who would be hearing a water law case, including petitions for judicial review, to be certified by the court based upon experience and training. And if a case were heard in a district court where the judge didn't have that certification, then they would have to bring in a certified judge to hear that case. It would still be heard in the county of origin, but it would have to be heard by a case or court by a judge that has a certification, including training to be specified by the administrative office of the court. So don't know. It's been a while, and we'll keep you posted on that. Let's see. Also in the packet, I included information. I see Lauren is here from the Division of Water Resources, and I think Nicole is also, Goring is on the call as well. I'm on the advisory committee for the update to the state water plan. Doug Busselman is on there. I think Jake, a few others perhaps. We had a meeting back in June to kind of go over the progress that the division has made on the update to the state water plan, which is now about 20 years old or older. And I put the information here because I found a few things in here. Some of it was already covered by Kip in his presentation, but just some interesting data, and specifically as it relates to the central region with regard to surface water inventories and runoff from mountains and things of that nature, surface water outflows. And then when you get to the groundwater inventory, which of course is really what the hydrology in the central region is, it's not really surface water flows or perennial flows per se, but groundwater. And you can see just how extensive the central region is compared to other hydrographic regions in the state. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then some of the challenges and limitations that the division is working through to update the plan, and climate change obviously is an important piece of that. Dealing with the issue of perennial yield, which Kip covered a little bit, and then also the separation of surface water and groundwater accounting, at least for the purposes of how it's done, versus how how they're conjunctively managed, or should be managed, I should say. And then, again, talk about the initiative. So I know the folks from DWR are here. If there's any questions, sure we can get some responses, if not today, later. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask, I don't know if Jake's still on, if he just wants to give a quick update on his participation with Nevada Water and where they're at with their project.
Sure, Madam Chair. So yeah, Nevada Water is the National Science Foundation, where a group of folks led by the University of Nevada, Reno received some kind of seed money to, it was a planning grant is essentially what it is. And it allows them to, if you recall, many of us, on this board and others were involved in that process and kind of fleshing out what this Nevada Water would do. And then now is the kind of the precursor to the full-blown proposal to bring potentially, millions of dollars to the state for the operation of the Nevada Water program. So I was invited to go back to DC last month to the National Science Foundation, and it was all the applicants were invited back to kind of pitch their ideas. And I was representing rural water interests in the state. And I think we were well received, and, I think it'll provide some great opportunities if the university can be successful in pulling those funds in. But if anybody wants more information, it might be worthwhile. Oh, and we did receive a presentation, I remember, Jeff, from Ann Nolan on this. So this board has received that presentation in the past. And if you missed that, we can recycle that presentation to the top of your pile so you can kind of see what it's all about.
Thank you, Jake. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
That's it. Can I have that?
Grab it by there.
Yeah, whoever isn't here, you're missing a really great lunch. Terrific lunch.
Thank you, Tony.
Thought you'd appreciate that.
Well, I called Megan to make sure the Jeff didn't order one for me.
Item 12, discussion and possible action regarding water right applications filed with the Nevada State Engineer. Those are always included as part of your backup. If there's anything that jumps out at someone, some member of the authority, and you'd like to discuss it in a little more detail, now is your opportunity.
Yeah, Joni, this is Commissioner Ralph Keyes.
Yeah, Ralph, go ahead.
I could have the floor for a minute.
You bet.
Esmeralda County had applied for water rights for our little town of Gold Point about in 2019, and we never got an answer back from the state water engineer's office. But recently I did talk with Jeff. He brought some information to my attention that we may want to pursue some action now. So I may reach out to the committee here for your support. So, but I have to discuss it with my other commissioners first.
Yeah, Jeff and
So anyway.
Jeff and I have
Okay.
discussed that, and we would be prepared to hear that request. So please let us know when you need us.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. That was really all I had to talk about. But anyway, I'm probably going to bug out. I've got another meeting here. But that's what I wanted to talk about, was our potential request to the CNRWA to assist us in work to get our water rights for the town there. Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yeah,
This is
Nancy.
Yeah, if I might, Commissioner Keyes, this is agendized right now as an action item for the board. And what you might want to do is ask the board to consider helping out or filing an amicus brief on this court case while you've got the board here, and then
Okay.
check with your other commissioners later. Because
Well, let me bring it back to what the context of the agenda item is. And that
Yeah.
item is possible action on April, May, June, and July 2023 water filings.
Oh,
And previously and newly filed protest letters, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we could
Well-
could we make the argument that,
Let me.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Nancy and Commissioner Keys. So just for the group, let's be clear about what we're talking about here, and that is a water right that was application that was filed by Esmeralda County for water in Basin 144 LIDA, which has not been acted on, but part and parcel to that application is a petition for judicial review that was filed by a third party, and Intor for the same, basically water in the same basin. And the reason that the issue of a petition for judicial review and the possibility of either, well, Esmeralda County and Central Nevada Regional Water Authority would participate in this case as an amicus, by filing an amicus, is because the whole decision that this lawsuit or petition for judicial review is addressing is the restoration of a water right that was canceled, that now basically brings the basin to being fully appropriated. And the petition for judicial review seeks to remand basically that decision back to the state engineer, and if that happened, and if the state engineer reversed their decision, that would free up approximately 164 acre feet of water in a basin with a perennial yield of 3,000 acre feet, which is what the County of Esmeralda has applied for service for Gold Point, for both current and future demand, and then also for this mining company. And so that's why this is even being discussed as to whether or not the board could take action today to file an amicus. My recommendation, and I think this is consistent with the CNRWA policy on filing protests, is the board would consider that, but only if the county were doing the same. In other words, CNRWA as a separate entity would not file an amicus unless Esmeralda County filed an amicus, in which case then CNRWA could file an amicus, which is how we handle protests. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
is it appropriate then for Commissioner Keys or Commissioner Boland to bring a motion forward? Or do you think that's necessary?
My recommendation would be see where the county is, and if the county decides they want to participate in the amicus, we could bring it back here, because there would still be details to work out with regard to how the amicus would be filed, when, and the chair is pointing out to me that this case was filed March 13th, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that typically you have a certain amount of time, which has been passed, maybe 30 days or 90 days, I don't remember, in which to file an amicus. But that would be the first consideration, is whether or not the judge would even accept an amicus at this late date, which they may or may not be willing to do.
And is it appropriate to repeat my conversation from this morning? Never mind.
So, Commissioner Keys, if after this meeting we can get together and then we can kind of see where the county is headed on this, and then we can get back together.
Okay, that sounds fair enough.
Okay,
Appreciate
because
that.
I do think that we need to follow up and have a conversation with the attorney that filed this petition for judicial review on behalf of Intor, just to make sure.
Right, I think time is of the essence also.
I agree.
You need to act pretty quick.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
All right, we can talk after the meeting.
Thank you.
Oh, do you want to, Jeff, do you want to talk about any of these water rights applications?
I didn't really see anything in here that are out of the out of the ordinary. The only one that I had questions about, well, one of them that I had questions about was application 92734, filed June 5th in Basin 176, Neff Livestock and Equipment Company. It's an irrigation right. And I've never seen an application quite with this sort of justification, which is filing an application for water that would be partially supplemental to proof of an appropriation of a vested right. Maybe this is in Elko County, and I don't know if some of the experts on the phone know what that's about. I'm going to take a closer look at that. That was just filed, so there's time to work through that one.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, if I can on that one, I had noted it too. There are examples where there's somebody files for a water right to be supplemental to their vested claim. So there are quite a few examples, even here in Diamond Valley, where that's been the case. And I'll note the spreadsheet, it shows a duty of 0. I think that just was entered in wrong. It's actually a duty of 90 acre feet at a 3 acre foot per acre duty. So that it is a new appropriation of 90 acre feet, but it's supplemental. And also note that Ruby Valley has water available for appropriation.
Great, thank you, Jake.
And then I do have a couple comments to make at some point, Madam Chair, when Jeff's done.
I'm finished, Jake. Go ahead.
I brought this up before, and I don't know, it's not worthy of a protest or anything, but there's a lot of these greenhouses and things we're starting to see where it's like, I see a lot of them in Basin 162. There's a vineyard, one where somebody's putting in some grapes. There's one where they've created, I wrote down, but it's like 30 greenhouses or something, or 20 greenhouses. They're small. It says 23,000 square foot greenhouses. So they're changing irrigation water to commercial, but they're still growing. So one of them is commercial vegetables. There's grapes. We've seen hemp, and I know it's different than just in those circumstances. It's not the true duty where you do 4 acre foot per acre or whatever. So I can understand that, but it seems like it's as I've mentioned, and any farm is a commercial enterprise. Even growing Timothy or alfalfa is a commercial enterprise. And there seems to be additional requirements on you if you have an irrigation right, but by then changing to commercial. So that's just something I think we need to kind of keep an eye on, is this consistent movement of irrigation water to commercial, but it's still irrigation. They're still growing crops. And there ought to be consistency across the board. And there were 3 or 4 applications in this packet that are that case. And then the other thing I wanted to point out that, we've argued about the need to get adjudications complete in basins. So it's in the May packet. It'd be May, the 5th page of the May dates. And it's actually on the bottom of the top of page 5 of May. And it's the Halstead Forsgren ranches down in Railroad Valley. Very familiar with those ranches. I know who, runs them right now. So it's nothing about what they're doing. I just highlighting this as an example. There are 3 new filings for springs and for stock water. And in each of these, it describes existing improvements at those springs that have been developed. And it also talks about certificated rights or permitted rights and things that sit there that are no longer used. Like one of them's Dan Russell, there's the Bartholomew Corporation, and there's an AC Florio right. And every one of those references vested claims to those. So these folks filed for permitted rights as kind of top filings for their vested claims. And I do believe there are chains of title that exist for some of those areas down there. But again, this is one of those things where now somebody is filing for water and there's an underlying potential vested claimant on that too. And without there's no process to determine whether those vested claims are valid or not without going through the adjudication. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out, that I've seen that a few times in these that come forward, that people are filing on water where there's a vested claim underneath, and there's no notice to those vested claimants unless they pick up the newspaper and read it themselves. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Jake, is there a suggestion on how we might look at those, or what? I mean, do you have a sense of how the state engineer is handling those applications?
Well, these 3 applications, I use them as an example. I don't think there's really much issue with it because knowing the context, like Russell Ranches went bankrupt, and they went through a big bankruptcy proceeding. They own, many know they own many ranches in Nevada, central Nevada. But in that bankruptcy proceeding, the water rights were part of that. And so I do believe that these were transferred to somebody through that bankruptcy process, being familiar with the way that's been done here in Eureka County. So I do think somebody has a deed, that picked that up, that references these specific water rights, and whether they're the grazing permittee or not. These are the duck water allotment it's a shared allotment with the tribe. There are 2 or 3 permittees on that allotment. There's some common use areas, so I don't think we need to wade into that dispute. But all I'm pointing out is that if adjudications were done as they were intended to be done when we passed our water law, over 100 years ago, that these types of conflicts just wouldn't come up because people would know where they stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there are no other comments or applications to discuss, just a quick update on previously filed protest by CNRWA. We received notice on June 6th that Aquatrack, their applications for water from Granite Springs Basin 78, about 16,000 acre feet, in a basin that has a perennial yield of 4,500 acre feet. And the intent was to move water out of there as an interbasin transfer. State engineer denied those applications. CNRWA and a host of other organizations protested the applications based upon, all of what I just described, plus the interbasin transfer aspect of it, but more importantly, the fact that these are pretty much identical to applications that were filed for the same basins previously by the same applicant without any, and denied at that point no additional information. So those are done for now. And then the protests filed by CNRWA to Othium LLC's applications 91861 and 91862, 91861 in the Smoky Valley Tonopah Flat Basin 137A, and Basin 91862, application 91862 in Alkali Spring Basin 142, and those would be for duty of 3,500 acre feet. But the perennial yield is 3,000 acre feet. Our protests and others talk about not having available water, interbasin transfers, at least in the case of the Tonopah Basin 141 application, and also potential impacts. The response from the applicant was, well, yeah, we realize that these basins are over-appropriated or would be over-appropriated by this application, and that at least one of the basins is subject to an order by the state engineer, but these are temporary permits, and so we should be able to access that water. So that was the latest response, and nothing new from the state engineer on those, and those are the only outstanding protests that we have filed.
Authority members, anything else on this item? We'll move to item 13, board member, executive director comments. Are there any comments for the record from the members of the authority?
Norman Frey. One of the things that since I was a commissioner, I've been working a lot with Farm Bureau, and Farm Bureau has become a very good partner with Central Nevada Regional Water Authority. And we're anticipating, well, our memberships have been having trouble like a lot of organizations, from the Elks to Kiwanis and things like that, social organizations. But Farm Bureau does an awful lot of work to protect water resources and agriculture. And I just request that any of you who are not members, I think you get your money's worth out of a membership here. And we have communities that this organization represents that by talking about it today, I can reach out and touch people in Eureka County and all. It would behoove you to be involved in the making of Farm Bureau policy, because Nevada Farm Bureau policy goes on, a lot of it for consideration for national policy. A lot of it comes from national policy. And it's a marvelous way through our weekly newsletters and things to stay informed about issues important to agriculture and our rural lifestyle. So I've got applications with me here today, and we can get them to you. Just get a hold of Nevada Farm Bureau or myself, and we'll make sure it happens. And I sure appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Any other comments from the directors? Jeff? Over to you. Any executive director comment? Don't you like how I wait until you start eating? Jeff, start talking.
No, Madam Chair, I made all my comments in the previous agenda. Thank you.
Then let's go to item 14 and set a date, time, place, and possible
I
agenda
am so
items.
sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes.
It's Strickland here.
Hey, Deb.
Hey, we have a problem out once again in our area. Rover Metals is going to start some explorationary drilling out in Ash Meadows and the Amagosa playa, and it's very concerning. And I know you know all about this, Chair. You got to hear it yesterday at the board meetings for Nye County. It's unbelievable. We have a pupfish that stopped all development in that valley, and all of a sudden we're going to go drill 30 holes to look for lithium. It's very, very concerning. There was no NEPA. We have a problem. So I just wanted to make the board aware. I realize we're allowed to protest when it comes to water rights, but we sure don't get to protest this. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything else for the record?
Madam Chair, this is Gary Perea.
Yes, Commissioner Perea.
I just real quickly, I want to thank Churchill County for installing the new audio and video system. It was great to be able to see and hear all of
everybody. Yeah.
Really, you have an excellent system, so thank you.
The new IT guy from here, I think, probably really appreciates hearing the comments. Thank you.
Yeah, he's their IT representative has been with us the entire meeting, and that's been very helpful, and we appreciate him. Jeff, next meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next regularly scheduled quarterly meeting would be 3 months from now, so we will be looking at, if I get my password to open my calendar. Yeah, I put us in the October timeframe. I know the 6th is not going to work for Eureka County.
Hey, Jeff, our commissioners just changed our meeting dates to make it so you now have to remember something new. But they're now meeting the first and third Tuesdays of every month.
Oh, okay.
So October 6th would work for Eureka.
Okay, thanks, Jake. The last ones to make that switch to a day of the week as opposed to a date certain. Could be the 6th, 13th, 20th.
The 6th won't work for me because I have a Thursday evening meeting, hospital board.
Okay.
Jeff, this is Lori Carson. I would not, for White Pine County, I would not recommend, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, the 13th, because we have our annular eclipse that starts ahead of time on October, well, the festivities start ahead of time. That annular eclipse is October 14th. And so Baker, there's going to be a lot of hub. We have the San Francisco Conservatory out here. We have, oh gosh, I think it's the...
Yeah, we get it. The 13th.
Okay.
The 13th's out. So that leaves
Yeah.
the 6th and the 20th. I'm not available the 6th.
The 20th.
No, I'm available the 6th, but I would have to be on the phone because I have a Thursday night meeting. So, 20th?
I don't have, I thought I had.
We've lost Jeff.
Okay,
Oh, there
yeah,
you are.
I don't see a NACO meeting in October, but that may be because they're having a meeting in September as part of their annual conference, and then I don't know about SLUPAC. Those would be the two potential conflicts that I can think of. There may be others, but Jake, do you know?
SLUPAC does meet that week, but it's the 18th, and
Okay.
it's part of the Nevada Planning Conference.
Okay. Do you want to shoot for the 20th?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. And of course, that's subject to Churchill County being able to host us. We'll check with them. And then there was discussion about a special, perhaps, virtual meeting prior to the August 7th due date for applications for the Water Conservation Infrastructure Initiative. I don't know how people feel about that. If it's one, necessary, or two, if it is, when we would do something like that.
Jeff, are you still looking at October? We're still in October.
The next meeting, the quarterly meeting, would be October 20th.
Okay, because NACO doesn't meet in October.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Waits. NACO does not meet in October. Thank you for that. But we also talked earlier about the potential for a special virtual meeting prior to August 7th to go over applications for the Nevada Water Conservation Infrastructure Initiative, the $100 million grant program.
Why don't you, can we really set something today? It's going to depend on
A lot of things.
A lot of things. So you just let us know as long as we've got a 3-day advance warning.
I guess at this point, if I could suggest this, we'll know more next week, by the end of next week.
I was going to say, do you want to do it a week from today?
On the 14th. But we'll just have more information. I'm going to start working on this next week. I mean, if we were to do this, goodness, we're talking about what happened? Oh, there's July. I mean, potentially doing something on July 28th in the morning at like 9 o'clock, 9 to 10.
Sure.
But do you want to make it tentative at this point?
Yeah, let's make it, yeah.
Okay.
Did everybody on the phone get that?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay.
And I guess, Madam Chair, I guess what I would suggest is let's see where we are on the 14th with any updated information, and then make a decision the following week between myself and you and the Vice Chair about whether we need to hold this meeting. And if we do, we'll schedule it for the 28th as a virtual meeting at 9 o'clock for an hour, no more than an hour. And if we don't need it, we don't need it.
Okay.
Sounds good?
It's 5 minutes after 1 o'clock, so now I have to start paying all of you people overtime. But we are down to the last item, which is 15, public comment. Again, this time is devoted to comments by the general public. We do not take action on any of the items brought up under public comment, not until they're included on an agenda as a regular action item. Is there any brief general public comment?
Is that overtime, regular time, or?
It's time and a half, Norm, so. Any general public comment? Hearing none, general public comment is closed. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni.
My pleasure.